Open your Bible, please, to Matthew 18, beginning in verse 21. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife, children, all that he had, that payment be made. I want to emphasize, by the way, that would not have paid the bill, but it was gone against it. More about it in a moment. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion and released him and forgave him the debt. Read that, would you? He was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. Read it again. He was moved with compassion, released him, forgave him the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. We'll talk about that value in a minute. And he laid hands on him, took him by the throat, saying, pay me what you owe. His fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Please notice that's exactly the same words at the end of verse 26. Have patience with me, and I will pay you all. He said exactly the same thing, same appeal. Verse 30, and he would not. He wouldn't have patience. But he went and threw him into prison, a debtor's prison, till he should pay the debt. His fellow servants saw what had been done, and they were very grieved, and they came and told their master all that had been done. And the master, after he called him, said, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers, and this literally is a reference to the bill collectors. He didn't reinstate the entire punishment that would have been before. He doesn't say, now we're going to sell your wife and your kids and you into slavery. He just said, there's going to be bill collectors at the door for installment payments regularly. It was all forgiven, and you're not going to suffer what had been the punishment before. But neither are you going to enjoy the blessings of liberty you might have known until he should pay all that was due him, and the heavenly Father will also do to you. This is very sobering. If each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. Some of you heard me tell the story about the day I got on the plane and I was looking for the place. I anticipated it because I needed it. I was going to arrive just in time to get off the plane and rush to the place I was going to speak up in Portland. I'd been here for the multiple services that morning, and I got on the plane over in Burbank, go up from outside, not on a jetway, and as I got on the plane, I was expecting to hang my hanging bag right there in the compartment by the door, which is reserved. I'd learned many years before, they wouldn't let you hang your bag there if you weren't seated in first class, so I figured I've got a place, and the compartment was full. It was packed. And it irritated me because I looked and there was only about 3 people in first class, and I thought, you know, any other time I came up, never tried to hang in there, they'd say, are you in first class? No, then you have to hang your bag in back. But this time I have the right to hang it up here, and I need it because I got to get off the plane fast, and I did have a first class ticket, and I was ticked off. And you know, do you agree with me? Of course you do. I don't need to go there. There's no excuse for this. I mean, I don't mind even that they let some other people hang their bags in there, but there was no space for mine. Flight attendant looked at me and said, sir, are you seated in first class? I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, let me take your bag and I'll take it back and hang it for you. Well, that was kind of her, except it was way back there. And if I'm going to get off in a hurry at the end of the flight to get to my speaking engagement, you know, I've got to swim through humanity that's coming this direction. And it was just, you know, I sat down, I was really rankled. And I was tired from morning service, and I can think of excuses, but it doesn't justify how irritated. My arms were getting more and more tense as I sat there, and this is a number of years ago, and they used to have in first class, some of you will recall this, they had little packets of stationery in first class. It was kind of a little deluxe feature of it. And today you have to scoop out animals have been here in the last flight, but at any rate, figure that one out. I was seated there, and I thought, I'm going to write the president of the airline. I'm not going to name the flight attendant. I won't even say which flight. I'll just say sharpen things up so that first class, you pay enough extra, and I was going to do that. And I'm getting more tense and all the time. And it occurred to me, and you will admire the generosity of heart that came to me just then, because it all of a sudden occurred to me that maybe she had to do that because there were no places to hang things in back. Maybe that was it. She was forced to load my space with somebody else's bags. My space, paid for. Which places, other times I'd come seated in coach and try and do that, and sir, you'll have to hang your bag in the back, and just feel it. So I thought, I'm going to go back to the back of the plane. They hadn't taken, we weren't ready to leave yet, and I'm going to go back and look, just out of curiosity. And I stood up to go toward the back, getting more and more tense. Never said anything unkind to anybody. I am a Christian. And started to the back of the plane, and a voice spoke deep inside me. Sit down and let it go. Do you ever have the Lord speak to you and you pretend like you don't hear? So it's one of those where you kind of I went on toward the back of the plane. And I had no way in the world of knowing that seated 2 or 3 seats from the back of the plane, there was a little 4-year-old boy sitting on the aisle who had just drawn a picture with a black felt tip pen for his mother, and was showing her the picture, and his hand went that way. 4 years old, the most logical thing in the world is for this hand to go this way with a felt tip pen in it. And this happened at the exact instant that I'm coming up the aisle in light gray slacks and coming and right across the front. I was getting ready to write the president of the airline. The God of the universe wrote me a letter right across took the hand of a 4-year-old boy. You know what it said? It said, sit down and let it go. I have the gift of interpretation. Well, there's more to that story, but I did sit back down and I did let it go, and I said, Lord, forgive me for this is not that big a deal. And most of the reason that you laugh through that story is because you identify with it. We get ticked off about stuff that is relatively insignificant. There are far greater issues in life. But on this holiday weekend, as we celebrate the liberation of our nation, I want to talk about the freeing power of forgiveness. Because when I sat down, there's a whole lot to this story that I'm not taking time to tell of what happened in the literal physical release I felt when I let it go. And the rest that I had on the flight, the 2-hour flight to Portland, and how refreshed I felt when I got off the plane. And I didn't have any problem getting there on time. It all worked out. It all worked out, notwithstanding what was a momentary inconvenience. And as a matter of fact, it's a church that I spoke at least 2 or 3 times a year in those years. And one of the most powerful services I've ever had in my life in another location happened that night. And I have no question in my mind it wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been something transpire right in me that rectified my sense of need to somehow balance out the scales of universal justice by my irritation. We think that, if somebody doesn't do something, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. We got to do it. And it gets on bigger issues than this. I want to talk about forgiving things that are a lot bigger than somebody not saving space for your garment bag. I want to talk about stuff that happens that is unloving and rejective and sometimes calculatedly cruel, and other times just kind of passive and just cold shoulders you. And the times that you should have gotten a raise when other people did, because in fact, in truth, you did work harder than other people that got a raise and you didn't. And you were misjudged in your motivation because no one took time to understand. And there's other ways we do this. We are unforgiving toward people that don't meet our standards. We don't like the way other Christians do things they do. And the Church of Jesus Christ is shattered into 1,000 pieces over people that, well, they, like I said, I don't like their style. And, you know, they do this. And we've got judgments to pass on just about everything, right on down to, you know, where is that waitress? And I've got to get my order in, and I've got an appointment to keep. And the waitress comes and she treats you kind of tacky. And it never occurs to our minds that she may have had the hardest thing in her life happen to her just before she came to work this morning. But who cares? Because I've got an appointment to keep. And it's the way we live life. And everything's in a tangle of unforgiveness and smallness of soul. And we're taught that we have our rights. And there are certain things that's difficult to not acknowledge, because there's nothing in what I'm saying today that is arguing for the proposition that every brutality should go unnoticed, or every abuse should simply just be forgiven and nothing done. There's certain things that should be taken care of that involve laws and certain actions. But it's one thing for things to be set right by a law, and another thing to carry resentment and bitterness and anger in your heart. And Jesus pins it all the way down to this one issue, that if you have been forgiven, you have essentially lost your right to be unforgiving, critical, judgmental, retaliative. There may be certain things that you know about and something doesn't need to be done. I one time dealt with a woman who had been just brutalized by her husband over and over, and she thought that forgiveness required that she never did anything. Finally, it come to the limits of the prospect of even her life being in jeopardy. And I said, my dear lady, that text doesn't mean that. It means you have no right to live with your heart set in bitterness or resentment. Forgiveness doesn't mean that what is being forgiven was right. It means that you are rescinding the right to be angry, hateful, judgmental, to get your pound of flesh out of it. Now, the story is pretty clear. You don't need to take a whole lot of time with this. What a lot of times we miss is in the use of the word talent and denarii, 10,000 talents and 100 denarii. Let me tell you the difference in that without taking time to justify it, but just scholarship will verify it. This is $2.5 billion by today's dollar on the market, and the present day value of gold, which is $350 an ounce right now. $2.5 billion compared with $10,000. 100 denarii would have been 100 days' pay. Given approximate, the average income in America is $36,000 to $40,000 a year today, just the mean average, and this would be about 3 months' salary, $10,000. The comparison is ludicrous. The difference is the second figure could be paid. Given time, you could pay off $10,000. Given time, if your income is, and to use the figures that would have been characteristic here, if your income is 40 grand a year, you're not going to pay off $2.5 billion. You can't even, if you put the whole thing against it, you're not even touching the interest, much less the principal. So this is a futile proposition. But nonetheless, the servant had said, the first one had said, have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. See, how did a guy get in debt like this? That's not even intended to be figured out. Jesus is telling us something that staggers the imagination, because if we could see the horror of what sin does to humanity and what any one of our private sin, however unintended, what it does to damage the system. I'm not hurting anybody, just hurting myself. Well, as though God didn't care about that. except nobody lives or dies to themselves. We would recognize 2 billion as peanuts compared to the things that in the invisible realm happens because of sin. And the Lord's not trying to deal with guilt. He's trying to help us to understand forgiveness. And he says, when you've been forgiven more than you can imagine, then sit down in the place of peace that you've been given in that love and let everything else go as far as others are concerned. And it's God's way of saying, when will you get over it? When will you cease just being tit for tat? Well, I just don't like the way they do. They carry themselves rather snobbishly. Maybe they do. So who are you? And who made you the person who's the official qualified person from heaven to determine who's snobbish and what attitudes ought to be shown toward them? There's not a person that doesn't understand something of God's heart for the way he created humankind in terms of gender that could help but feel a bit of pain over the recent choices that have been made by courts in other parts of the world concerning a very passive attitude on the issue of homosexuality. It's difficult to talk about. You can sound like church just rises up to spit in the face of homosexuals. That's not our call. To hold to the standard of God's word doesn't require that I be hateful toward anybody. It's not a matter of commending judgments that are made. It's simply recognizing I live in a pretty broken world, so do you. And I'm called constantly to recognize I have not ever been given the place to sit in the seat of judgment. It doesn't mean that I don't make decisions. It doesn't mean that I don't accept the disciplines of a believer. It means that I have rescinded the right to sit in judgment upon anything in my world that doesn't suit me, right on down to garment bags. When Jesus said this, he says the servant went to his fellow servant, and it's really rather dramatic. The figure says he took him by the throat and drove him to his knees. He says, "Pay me what you owe." Well, at least I don't do that. No, we don't necessarily do that. We do other things. We don't say anything. We become stubbornly silent and bleed it out of people that have irritated us by not showing them just the generosity of acceptance. There's 1,000 other devices that we use in our human systems to let people know that we don't like what they've done to us. Yeah, well, she's not going to get any tip from me. Try the discipline of doubling the tip of the person that frustrates you. Well, if I do that, then they'll just keep on doing worse. You know what? I bet they won't. I bet they won't. It is not within the human makeup to have the strength to balance the scales of cosmic justice. It will not only exhaust you, it'll break you. Doctors agree everywhere that the majority of human affliction has its roots in some kind of bitterness, resentment, bottom line, unforgiveness. People have been hurt, and the reactions have built up in their systems to finally, our human frame was not constructed to be able to tolerate what the juices of unforgiveness can do to your frame. It burns stuff out ahead of time. And Jesus came to give freedom. There's no two beautiful back-to-back verbs, more beautiful back-to-back verbs in the Bible than what there are here in verse 27, and I asked you to say it over and over with me. He was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. The word release means to free. The word forgave means to, it's literally the best way that you could show that is to just take and wad the bill up and throw it away, or toss it in the flames, burn it, it's gone. So the forgiveness of the debt is one thing. This is what the Lord does with us. I have removed the record of your transgressions. As far as the east is from the west, so far as I've removed your transgressions from it. It's away. And then he turns around and not only has removed the record, but he sets us free to know life. And having been set free, we have this uncanny capacity to go around and just say, well, I'm free, but you owe me. You owe me. You owe me big. And Jesus says, you can't do that. It'll backfire on you. And when he says that Father God will do the same to you, don't think God's up in heaven just saying, there they go. Okay, I'm going to get them. There, they did that. He'll do it to you because it's in the construct of things. When you release flows. He's made things that way. And when you don't, he's created it to work the way that freedom works, not created it the way that smallness works. So he's not going to change the order of things because I've decided to be small. It just starts closing out on me. And everything starts clogging up. And the call of Jesus is a call that says to everybody, freely you have received, freely give. It was just a short time after Ann and I got married, I met Leo. That's one of her 6 brothers. And I knew that Leo was away from the Lord, though he'd walked with the Lord earlier in his life. And I decided I'm just going to be friendly with Leo. He's going to think that his brother-in-law, and I was still in preparation for ministry, that I'm going to kind of put the screws on him and try and hot gospel him back into the kingdom. But I thought I'm just going to be a buddy, just be a friend. And for 15 years, I could never establish a relationship with Leo because he rejected me. He did it in a socially correct way, but it was still, you were just kind of kept at a distance. And I remember so clearly that day. It was at Anna's folks' 50th anniversary. And I remember just thinking to myself, you know, I'm tired of trying with Leo. I was kind of irked. In fact, I remember saying to Anna one day, I said, honey, your brother is just, he said, what a drip. And I really tried. When I made that decision that day, I'm through trying. I didn't really think of any consequence to it. I wasn't angry. I felt rejected. I wasn't pouting. I was just tired of putting any energy into a relationship attempt that never got any response. That was June that year. So next February, it was Sunday morning, and I was eating a bowl of cereal in the kitchen. It was real early, about 7:15. I had to come to 7:30 service. And Anna and the kids weren't up yet. And I'd walked into the kitchen, and there on the kitchen table, I'm doing this bowl of cereal, there's a Valentine. It was Valentine's Day. There was a Valentine there, and it was clearly had a punchline. It was a joke. And I opened it, and I don't remember what the joke was, but it was a card from Leo's daughter, Sandy, to Becky, who at that time was 14. And this card, the joke was not the joke. It was what happened when I read what Sandy wrote Becky, just a little note that said, love Sandy, and then it said, P.S., by the way, thanks, Becky, for your recent letter. You said you're praying for my daddy every day to come back to Jesus. And I remembered that I hadn't prayed for Leo. I couldn't remember when I'd last prayed for Leo. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that I hadn't prayed for Leo since that day in the backyard last June when I said I'm through trying. I hadn't planned to not pray for Leo. I didn't say, God, I'm not going to pray for Leo anymore because he's inconvenienced me. He's not nice to me when I try and be nice to him. Stuff clogs up and you don't even realize it. Well, I literally, that day, that hit me so powerfully, I literally fell. It was my knees went weak, and I went down. I was right by the carpet beginning into the dining room from the kitchen, the breakfast room, and I just went down on my face for just a couple of minutes before the Lord. And I said, Lord, I apologized. I felt grieved that I had grieved the Lord, because I knew I had. There's more to that story, and it goes to the next August when Leo called on a Sunday night, and Leo had come back to Jesus after being almost 20 years away from the Lord since he'd been a teenager. And how moved I was to hear that when he called us, and he said, guys, I just wanted to call you because I knew you'd be among the first I would want to know and who would want to know. I came back to the Lord today. And as I looked at that situation, I couldn't help but wonder how many times we clog things that we don't know what the implications may be. You mean, Pastor, that maybe your attitude might have even kept Leo away longer? I don't know. I don't know. But I'm going to tell you, but don't even say that, Pastor Jack. I don't want to even think that possibly my attitude would make a difference in somebody else's ability to respond to God. Listen, it'll make a difference in their ability to respond to you. Well, it's not me. They're the ones that close the door. But you're the one that has the life of Jesus. Well, they do too. What are you going to do? Argue the point until they give in first? At some point, we have to come to terms with the fact that we have been given an awesome grace that puts us under an awesome point of accountability. And that's to forgive because we've been forgiven. And while I've been bringing this message, stuff comes to people's minds in the room. You think of things. You think of people. You think of attitudes. And I guarantee you this, you may not think of it now, but you will. I don't want to say that to induce guilt. I'm wanting to induce freedom, because that's what Jesus taught us this for. This weekend, as we celebrate freedom in our nation, and remember all the things that played into it, we're mindful that the greatest freedom of our relationship with God calls us to a point of accounting to, and to say, Lord, just cover me with that grace, not just that my sin be washed away, but that the flow be released in me. Just sing, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, amazing love.